Welcome. My name is Nicole Hurling. Welcome to the Parent Advocacy Program. Today we are discussing bipolar disorder. I'd like to introduce my guest, Carl Schallahorn. Thank you, Carl, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
When we come right back, we'll get more in details of this disease. Thank you.
I believe in nature.
I believe in the spirit.
I believe in trust.
Beauty.
I believe in my mom.
Strawberry ice cream.
Fortune cookies.
Chocolate.
I believe in
The tooth fairy.
being honest with yourself.
I believe in Santa Claus.
Aliens, of course. I believe what I want to believe.
I believe in myself.
I believe in myself. I believe in peace.
Welcome back. Again, my name is Nicole for the Parent Advocacy Program. I have Carl Schallahorn here. Carl, you have bipolar disorder, is that correct?
That's correct.
What is that disease?
Basically, bipolar disorder is a mood disorder which entails swings of mood from high to low. Typically, it is usually first diagnosed when the individual is between, say, 19 and 25 or 18 and 25. It affects approximately 4 million people, about 1% of our population.
Okay. Now, when did you realize you had the disease?
I was initially I had a problem when I was in college where I was experiencing hallucinations, paranoia. It basically involved me going into the hospital. I was essentially brought back to Buffalo from Michigan, and when I came back over a couple of years or so, I was in various psychiatric outpatient and inpatient facilities. As a result of that, with that amount of time, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It didn't happen originally. There was a belief that I was schizophrenic for a while there.
Really?
Yeah.
How long was that when you had these hallucinations in Michigan and then you were sent back to Buffalo to kind of be diagnosed? What was that time frame before you start having some hallucinations to when you were actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
Like I said, it was approximately about 2 years.
2 years.
In many cases, and bipolar is the kind of disease that it can be misdiagnosed for a variety of reasons because it mimics other psychiatric disorders. So what happened was after trying different medications, things like that, I ended up having a severe depressive episode in 1983 during the summer, and I was then taken to Buffalo Psychiatric Center, and during that period was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
So when you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, how long did it take for you to get the correct treatment to treat your disease?
Well, that's sort of a tough question to answer because, for one, I wasn't fully compliant with treatment.
Sure.
One of the problems I had that precipitated the problem with the disease was I was using drugs and alcohol. So as a result of that, I ended up sort of interfering with the treatment that the medications were supposed to be doing. So it wasn't until probably 7 years after having been initially diagnosed that I began to kind of turn things around.
Good.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, is bipolar disorder, is that hereditary?
It's often considered to be hereditary. Usually, actually, there's been a lot of studies done that show that individuals with bipolar disorder have a risk of having offspring or other close relatives have the same disease. So typically, it's known or stated that people should be careful with watching children or things like that.
Is it curable?
It's not curable, but it's treatable. And that's one of the things that people often mistake. Because it's a disorder that often impairs relationships and impacts relationships, jobs, things like that. People often will feel that it's something that is going to go on forever.
Right.
But with proper treatment, medication, diet, exercise, things like that, obviously not using drugs or alcohol,
Absolutely.
Will help treat that disease.
So bipolar disorder is a chemical imbalance in the brain.
That's one of the things that's believed to contribute to it, yes.
Okay. And it's hereditary.
Yes.
When does it normally start for most people? When do they start seeing the symptoms? I know you started seeing your symptoms in college. what's the normal age range?
That's pretty much the usual time for individuals to be diagnosed or have symptoms at least, roughly between 18 and 25. And sometimes it does occur later in life. Occasionally it may occur even earlier. There are cases where children have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder as well. It might be confused at an earlier age with a child with ADHD or ADD, something like that. And then it's discovered that it is actually bipolar disorder.
What would you say are some of the symptoms, some of the common symptoms? I know we've talked about this, possibly mood swings. Could you elaborate on some of the most common symptoms somebody may want to look at if they think they have bipolar disorder?
Well, that's what makes bipolar disorder unique in that it features both manic or mania type symptoms as well as depression. And they usually are cyclical, where one will go on for a while and then the other will occur. Basically, if you look at someone with bipolar disorder, the mania side, the manic side, they might have pressured speech, which means they're speaking real fast, flight of ideas, things like lack of sleep, usually other impulsive behaviors, drug and alcohol use. Those will often be a part of the symptoms. The depressive part happens to be one where there might be lack of motivation, lack of drive, prolonged periods of sadness, loss of appetite, and oftentimes, as I said before, one will happen right after the other, which makes it very difficult to predict.
So is there, would you say, a catalyst to bring on those onset of symptoms, or could something happen traumatic in someone's life to bring them on, or could it just happen? Because a lot of things you mentioned is in everyday life.
Right.
So I don't want the audience to think that if they have some of these symptoms, oh my God, I may have bipolar.
Right.
But then again, I want to make sure that, we kind of clarify that a little bit.
Usually, bipolar disorder isn't precipitated by an event.
Okay.
Like, for instance, we all have probably heard about post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
Which is something that usually occurs with an individual after an event or events that, like it says, are traumatic to the system or to the person. Bipolar disorder is, as I said earlier, usually a genetic disorder where you can't always say whether it's going to happen or not. I mean, sometimes there might be more indication than others if it could be predicted in a young person. But as far as an actual event, usually, as far as I know, there isn't a case like that.
Okay. Well, that's good for the audience to know. When we come back, what I want to discuss is treatments for the disease and medications and various type of research that may be going out there to help people that have this disease, which is close to
4.4 million roughly. That was a study done a few years ago that showed that's many people.
Wow. Yeah. And it's a pretty even kill between men and women.
Right. And also, right. There's no determination or difference in ethnicity or anything. It's pretty much, it has no respecter of persons. It affects all people.
And in the age and the race, all that is pretty much even killed.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, we'll be right back with Carl Schellhorn. Thank you.
Can you tell which of these children was not born free? Can you tell which of these children was not born equal? Can you tell which of these children does not deserve to be treated with dignity? We can't either. Human right number one. We are all born free and equal. What are human rights? Find out at youthforhumanrights.org.
Hi, this is Nicole Harling again with the Parent Advocacy Program. I have my guest here, Carl Schellhorn, discussing bipolar disorder. Carl, when we left off, I mentioned that I wanted to discuss treatment and research on the disease. Let me ask you first, how did you stabilize your illness?
Well, as I said, when I was first hospitalized, it was 1981. When I was in high school, I didn't exhibit any symptoms whatsoever of bipolar disorder, either mania or depression, but I had begun to experiment with alcohol and drugs. So that was one of the things that kind of helped, and the disease,
Sure.
take place.
Yes.
When I decided to finally acknowledge and accept the fact that I had an illness like this, I also had to stop the alcohol and drug use. So what happened was in 1988, I joined a 12-step program. And when I stopped using drugs, that was the point where I began to realize that I could successfully manage my illness. I had 2 episodes in the years after that, but they were managed much more quickly, and I believe that's a great deal to the fact that I wasn't abusing anything.
So do you think that people with bipolar disorder are also have drug and alcohol illness with that also?
There is a certain degree of individuals that have both bipolar disorder and have substance abuse issues. There certainly is a connection there. I don't think it's most. From what I understand, it's not as many. But there are some people who have serious mental illness who do also have drug and alcohol issues. And the reason being is that they find that a way to self-medicate their, their illness in a way that they feel is best for them.
Right.
Even though in reality, as most people would know, when you're buying something off the street, you don't really always know what you're getting.
That's right.
So that's the one real danger. It's not controlled, it's not regulated. Whereas if you're working with a psychiatrist or a medical professional, they are able to control the use or the dosage, I should say, of what you're taking and monitor your progress.
Now, we discussed this earlier. Some of your symptoms that you felt like, or some other people's symptoms, felt like you can do anything.
Right.
That you were on a high. Could you
Right.
elaborate on that?
Yeah, when I was basically having problems with the mania side, the manic side, I had a lot of grandiosity. I began to have delusions. Delusions are basically things where I was thinking I was someone that I wasn't, just really grand ideas and believing I was either Jesus or, something along those lines. And that's not uncommon for people to have those delusions with mental illness.
Right.
And as a result of that, I found myself, basically using risky behaviors and things like that that really were really very dangerous.
Wow. And so if you felt that way and you're taking drugs also, then that probably heightened some of those symptoms.
Absolutely. The term they use is exacerbate. Exacerbates those symptoms a great deal, and to a point where you lose pretty much control of your reality.
Really?
Yeah.
How long would one of your episodes be, if you will? Varies.
That's very interesting. It varies, but this is the thing about it. I remember specifically, because I used to keep a journal.
Okay.
And back in those days, I would write. And sometimes you could see the progression from entry to entry over the period of, say, a month or maybe 2 months.
Interesting.
Where you kind of see myself trailing off to the point where the last entries, I wasn't making any sense.
Wow.
So it's really pretty remarkable.
That's
And
interesting.
it's you don't know. It kind of creeps up on you.
Really?
Yeah.
Now you have the right cocktail, if you will, of medication.
Right.
What type of medication is used to treat bipolar? I know there's various types, but can you name some of the most common ones?
Sure. One of the oldest, most common, I wouldn't say most common anymore, but it used to be one of the most common drugs for bipolar disorder is lithium. And actually, I still take lithium right now.
Okay.
And they don't even know how it works. There's been a lot of research done on lithium. They don't know specifically how it affects brain chemistry. They just know that it works. And other people have taken things. There's like Depakote, for instance. Seroquel is another medication. There's one that's advertised on TV now called Abilify.
I've seen that.
So there are a variety of medications where researchers are trying to find that perfect drug to stabilize individuals. And what I've learned, and even when I was early, in my history of mental illness, sometimes what one drug might work for one person won't work for another.
Right.
So you really have to kind of almost be patient and try to work with your doctor to find out what's best for you.
Do you also do talk therapy?
Yep.
Or do patients do talk therapy? Does that help?
Yes. One thing that I did for many years was outpatient counseling, usually one-on-one sessions or even group therapy, where you find the first part of the task is to control the symptoms. And then once that is done, behavioral therapy is often done to help the individual maintain that stability and learn proper behaviors and ways to deal with thinking,
Right.
to control the illness.
Well, I really think it's ironic that you have bipolar disorder, but you are a functional person in society. You work at a major institution here in Buffalo, New York. So you can definitely live with the disease and lead a very productive life. Because I know there's some stigma for people that have bipolar. And how do you get beyond that?
That's a good point. In our society, at least in America, and even I think in other parts of the world, mental illness is a stigma. It's a issue where people are shunned that have mental illness. So one of the things that brought me to the point where I wanted to talk about this was when I saw Britney Spears being all over the media back in January.
Yeah.
They were saying, "Oh, she has bipolar disorder." Well, whether she does or whether she doesn't, she shouldn't be the poster child for bipolar disorder.
Absolutely.
We need to have people that are living healthful lives with bipolar disorder.
Absolutely. Like, for example, you mentioned Britney Spears. Someone that has bipolar disorder is Jane Pauley,
Right.
who was the host for Good Morning America for a number of years. Right. Very successful. Started her own show, and she mentioned she had bipolar.
Right.
So if you see more positive influences like that,
Right.
then that may lessen some of the stigma. What are some of the more severe treatments of bipolar disorder?
Another one that actually I incurred back years ago was shock treatments, or ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. That's typically given to someone who is severely depressed, as I was at one time. And there's always, once again, talk about stigma. If you've ever seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson, there's a scene where he receives ECT near the end of the movie, and that's really not how, it's a gross depiction of what the reality is with that. I recall very, well going through that, and I know what it's like. I was very fortunate because it actually worked. But they don't know how that works either. They've done a lot of research on ECT, and they haven't been able to pinpoint how it works or how it affects the brain chemistry. They just know that it does in some cases. Not all cases, but some.
Okay.
Yep.
And so you have medication, you have talk therapy, extreme case ECT. I know some people that on bipolar do not like taking the medication or some medication because it makes them very lethargic.
Right.
And they feel very down, depressed, and almost like the medication is a depressant, if you will. Have you heard that?
Oh, absolutely. And I've dealt with some of that in the past with medications. But, one of the things I've learned is you have to give it time to work, and your body has to adjust to it. And one of the key things I do to deal with, my illness still today is exercise, which, may be a bit for some people to do, but if you can get out and get your blood moving and get your legs moving and your body moving, you'll feel better. And I always heard that when I was depressed, oh, just exercise. I never believed it, but it's true. It really does work.
Wow. So you not only exercise, but you eat right.
Right.
Which is, I know it just seems so standard. You eat right, and you also sleep.
Right. But another thing, well, just speaking of the eating part, one of the main things is caffeine and like I said, alcohol. It's not really good for a person who's taking medication to be using, a lot of caffeine or alcohol, because once again it affects the brain chemistry.
Right.
The sleep part is something that I found that I just need to get sleep. That's just one of those things. When I don't get sleep, it really messes up my biological clock.
Really?
And I find myself, being all kind of out of sorts.
Out of sorts and on adrenaline, I guess.
Right.
Where you're going. All right. Well, we're going to come back and discuss other things regarding bipolar disorder, such as other treatments, research, and what are the next steps for folks that are diagnosed with that disease. Please come back. Thank you. Hi, this is Nicole Harling with the Parent Advocacy Program with Carl Shalahorn, and we are discussing bipolar disorder. Carl, let me ask you, what would you want to say to someone who is diagnosed with the disease but is struggling to achieve stability with it?
Well, considering I've been one of the kind of people that has dealt with this pretty much more than half my life, I would say you really have to take the emphasis out of the negative and put it on the positive. There are a lot of people that deal with this disease every day that are leading normal, productive lives. So one of the things I think you have to hold on to is just that simple idea of hope. I remember when I was struggling for those years, I always had the belief that I could get better. And it took a while. Sometimes you have to be patient, either with medication or with doctors or with just life in general. But you really need to just believe that you can get better. Also, it really helps to have a family and friend support system to assist you, going through all this. If there's anybody watching that might have a loved one with bipolar disorder, they really need your help, because you can't do this by yourself. It's so important that you give help to people that have this illness and help them get the help they need. There's a lot of resources in the Western New York area that people can go to, many of which are free of charge. The Mental Health Association is one of them. They're located on Delaware Avenue. They're a great resource on all kinds of mental health agencies and things like that. NAMI is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. NAMI has a local Buffalo chapter with a family education group. It's a support group for loved ones of individuals with mental illness. There's also the Western New York Independent Living Project. They have the Mental Health Peer Connection. There's just so many different places in the area that want to help, but you have to be willing to ask for help, and that's the important thing. You can't just go through this saying, I can do it by myself. We all need that kind of help from time to time.
Absolutely. And for, since society has such a stigma against mental illness, and someone, as you mentioned, may think their loved one may have it or they may have it, who can they contact? And you mentioned some of those agencies. Are they in a phone book? Are they on the internet? They can just call?
Yeah, they're all can be found online. If you just put those into into a search engine in Google or whatever, you can find them. The phone book, of course, is a great resource. All these places are in the phone book. But NAMI, the local NAMI chapter, actually has a great resource called Mind Matters. It's a book. It's a directory of services for mental health in Erie County and Western New York. So what I would say is, if you really want to get something that's all in one package,
Yes.
Contact the local NAMI chapter, 862-8229.
Okay, and then they can get that book
Right.
is free?
It's free.
Wow, and it has all the listings there.
Right.
What are some of the other things you want to tell the audience about bipolar disorder?
Well, aside from what I mentioned, is that it's not a death sentence. Let me just say one thing too that's also kind of interesting. When people are diagnosed with life-threatening illnesses, it might be, say, cancer or kidney disease or things like that, people tend to rally around them. Unfortunately, in our society, we don't rally around people with mental illness. We
Kinda
tend to
shun
push them
away.
away. Exactly. So what I think is important that we need to remember is that these people, like myself, I couldn't have done this without the help of my family and my parents and
Absolutely.
and friends. I needed support all the way through that. So when a person is diagnosed or might be in the hospital, visit them. Just because a person's in a psychiatric unit doesn't mean that
Not in a straitjacket.
Yeah,
or anything.
exactly. So it's real important because they need to be loved as well. They really need to find that support.
And you found that helped you tremendously.
I can't tell you how much. My parents, especially, I'm an only child. My parents gave me an incredible amount of support. My mother never cut me any slack. She never let me go and just do whatever I wanted. She was real tough, but they never gave up on me.
Wow. So, it's ironic you mentioning some of the things you can do to help with the disease, and it's just like the basic things: eat right, exercise, sleep, have that family support, the basic things we hear in society all the time. And you're mentioning that, and that's helped you stabilize your disease along with treatment and medication and so forth. I find that very ironic and refreshing, if you will. Would you agree?
Exactly. It's that whole concept of wellness.
Right.
And wellness pertains to not only people with mental illness, it pertains to everybody. Learning how to balance, I didn't even touch on the spiritual aspect. I mean, another aspect of my recovery was with my spiritual life, church, and also my connection with spirituality through the 12-step program. That was a very strong component in my life that kind of got me through. When I couldn't do anything else, I could at least pray.
Absolutely.
And I found a lot of support in my church that helped me, get through those times. So there's the spiritual dimension,
Yes.
there's the physical, the mental, and the emotional. If you put all those together in one package, then you could find, a way to get through this disease.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the 12-step program. So even though you're going to the 12-step program, you're still going through it. Just because you're taking medication and you're able to stabilize your disease, that's one of the factors. So you still are going through meetings with the 12-step program.
Exactly. I still regularly attend 12-step meetings, and it's important because I can't forget where I came from. And that's one thing that I always have to acknowledge is that I'm this close away from the next drink or drug or the next emotional mental relapse.
Absolutely.
So I have to be really careful and stay in touch with that part of my life. I can't ever forget it.
What are some of the things that you're doing in the community, reaching out and talking to people? What are some of the things you're doing?
Well, as I said, the catalyst was seeing Britney Spears on TV, and I thought to myself, why don't we have any people talking in a positive sense about mental illness and things like that, like I'm doing. So I've contacted, for instance, the Western New York Children's Psychiatric Center was one of the first places where I got to go in. I got to speak to the staff. I got to speak to the students. And that was a real gratifying experience.
What was the students' reaction when you were speaking to them?
They were teenagers, so I think that tells you a lot. There wasn't a grand, round of applause, whatever, but I think they
Sure, you
they
touched
listened.
some of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They listen.
Yeah.
I also had an opportunity to speak to the Mental Health Peer Connection, which is a part of the Western New York Independent Living Project. Action for Mental Health is another agency in Buffalo that is excellent with helping advocacy and self-help for mental health. So I spoke to one of their groups. So, I'm just trying to just go in and wherever I can speak to people and, kind of give a bit of hope.
And, the one thing I want to emphasize, too, is that Mr. Shallenhorn, or Carl, is not a doctor or a professional, if you will, in disease, but you have it, and you're very functional, and you're professional with it. And so that's one of the things we want to focus on is how you can, again, live a successful life with bipolar disorder. And that's why you go into these different groups, even as young as teenagers, and what you mentioned, I think that'll make a difference. And continue with that work. What are your next steps? What are your goals, if you will?
Well, some of my goals are to continue, talking to groups locally, maybe even, on a statewide basis, through NAMI. NAMI has a program called One Voice, I believe it's called. And essentially you can go in and talk to groups and once again share your message with them and dispel some of those myths that surround mental illness. There's also opportunities that I'm looking into as far as just working with local agencies and things like that, speaking to them as well.
So the eventual goal, and it's maybe a big goal, but it could be achieved, is just to have people, well, don't stigmatize the disease, and if you think you have it, go out, find treatment.
Right.
And talk to professionals and realize that it's not a disease that will slow you down. You can still live a successful life with it.
Right. It's important, I think, for people to understand, and I remember when I was having problems years ago, I'd watch TV, and every once in a while you'd see, say, a motivational speaker.
Right.
I remember seeing this guy named Leo Biscaglia, if you know who he is, and he would talk, and I thought, oh, that's great, but that doesn't make any sense to me. But, it stuck. I remember that even years later, his message of being positive and hopeful and things like that. So, we need to hear people, give us this message consistently, because if we don't hear it, we'll never know it's there.
Carl, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's very enlightening. The numbers to the various organizations that he mentioned earlier will be listed after the show, so please look out for the website and those phone numbers. Again, thank you so much, and I appreciate you coming on a parent advocacy program today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome.